We've all been lied to for years. Right in front of our eyes, they kept telling us the same lie. Plastics are recyclable. This lie still appears everywhere, on TV, radio, billboards, all around us. And do you know who's telling this lie? The industry that poses the biggest threat to the health of the planet. They want to keep selling the product that causes the greatest harm to our Earth and shift all the blame onto us, the consumers. In this video, I will try to reveal the truth behind one of the biggest environmental lies in history, what's really going on, and what we must do from now on. If you're ready, let's begin.
Is one of the most fascinating and useful inventions of human engineering. Don't get me wrong, plastics are cheap, lightweight, and durable. That's why they have become indispensable in almost every field, from bridges to buildings, cars to sports equipment, computers to phones. In fact, the logic behind their production is quite impressive. Just as the proteins in our cells are formed by linking building blocks called amino acids, just as our DNA is shaped by the assembly of nucleic acids, plastics are also created in a similar way by linking simple molecules called monomers in chains. That's why plastics are sometimes called polymers. There are natural polymers like DNA, as well as synthetic or man-made polymers like PVC water pipes. How these molecular chains are synthesized and what properties they can acquire dives deep into the world of chemistry. But today, we won't talk about chemistry. We'll talk about real life.
Because when we put the damage plastics cause to nature on the other side of the scale, the balance completely breaks down. Getting rid of plastics is almost impossible. This is because these chains are so tightly bonded that there are hardly any natural mechanisms capable of breaking down this structure. Yes, some bacteria, fungi, and worm species can break down plastics, but this process is very slow, and this ability is extremely rare. That's why a plastic bottle thrown into nature can remain there for 450 years. Think about it. If Newton had lived in the plastic age and drank apple juice from a plastic bottle, then threw it into his garden, that bottle would still be there today. Because plastic straws take 200 years to decompose in nature, we still see them stuck in the noses of sea turtles today. The toothbrush you use today could still be found in nature in the year 2521. Yes, you heard that right. We produce and consume so much plastic that almost every corner of the world is already covered in plastic. For example, in the Pacific Ocean, there are plastic islands, huge areas covering 1.6 million square kilometers, mostly made up of plastic waste. That's 3 times the size of Turkey. These islands don't just pollute the surface, they degrade the quality of the ocean and suffocate marine life. And this pollution isn't just on the surface. Plastic waste has even been found 12,000 meters below in the Mariana Trench.
But the situation gets even worse. Developed countries like Japan, Germany, the United States, France, and Italy export their plastic waste to less developed countries, such as Turkey, Vietnam, Malaysia, Laos, and India. They send their own trash to us. And while we earn a few cents, our environment pays the price.
Plastics do not completely disappear in nature. First, they break down into smaller pieces. Then they get even smaller. Eventually, they turn into particles called microplastics. These microplastics mix into the air and water much more easily than a plastic bag or bottle. And unfortunately, these particles reach our food, our bodies, and even our children. Just this year, a study found microplastics in the human placenta. This means plastic can even reach a baby in the womb. This stuff seeps into everything we eat and drink. But is plastic dangerous only in nature? No. When plastics get scratched, exposed to heat or sunlight for a long time, or simply age, they can leak harmful chemicals into food and drinks. For example, substances like BPA, bisphenol A, and phthalates can disrupt hormone balance in the body and increase the risk of cancer. BPA was once even used in baby bottles. Fortunately, it's now less common, but it hasn't been completely removed from our lives yet.
Why do we use so much plastic? Here is where the big lie comes into play. Plastic is actually a petroleum derivative. In other words, it is a direct product of the oil industry, one of the sectors that causes the greatest harm to the environment. About 4% of the world's extracted oil is used for plastic production. The first plastic was produced in 1869. It was cheap, easy to shape, and could be used in almost every sector. From kitchen utensils to food packaging, from cars to textiles, plastic quickly spread into every aspect of life. During World War II, the true value of plastics was finally realized. In this period, plastics were not only discovered but also entered mass production and became a global part of our lives. Many products that were previously made of metals or non-metals could now be produced much cheaper and faster thanks to plastics.
The American government, under the pretext of the war and patriotism, forced all plastic companies to collaborate. This led to an effective monopoly in the industry. During World War II, oil companies grew even richer, and after the war, launched a massive promotional campaign to introduce plastics to the public and increase consumption. The organization, now known as the Plastics Industry Association, then called the Society of the Plastics Industry, included all the major oil and chemical companies, subcontractors, suppliers, and retailers you can think of. This association spent millions of dollars each year, adjusted for today's money, on advertising campaigns to market plastics. Their goal was to make this still unfamiliar product attractive to the public and integrated into every aspect of life. Over time, people became familiar with plastics because they were cheap, lightweight, and quite durable. People started to reuse plastic products again and again. Right at this point, seeing sales beginning to decline, the industry developed a new marketing strategy. Plastics are actually single-use. Buying again is both more hygienic and more economical. Even durable plastics were said to be single-use. In other words, the public was constantly encouraged to consume more. This was largely untrue, but very profitable. For example, plastic baby bottles were said to be single-use. However, most of the plastic bottles we use today can be reused many times. Did these companies not know about the environmental damage caused by plastics? Of course they did. But they didn't care, because the system aimed to please shareholders, not protect nature. The performance metric was profit maximization, and there was no incentive within the system to protect the environment.
In the 1960s and 70s, the rising environmental movements noticed this destruction. Activists quickly organized after seeing how much harm plastics cause to nature. So much so that in the Earth Day protests held in 1970, 20 million people participated just in the United States. 1 in every 10 Americans took to the streets. This pressure disturbed the plastic industry. But instead of correcting themselves, they decided to build a new lie. Because real solutions would have cost billions of dollars, but lying to people in advertising cost only a few million. And that's how the big lie was born. Plastics are recyclable. The perception marketed with this message was not a real transformation, but a perception management campaign. And unfortunately, this lie worked. As people realized plastics harm nature, masses began throwing these products into recycling bins. Many countries and cities passed recycling laws, and the practices became widespread. But the plastic industry controlled this entire process from behind the scenes with very cunning moves. In 1988, a law passed in 40 US states made it mandatory to print a recycling symbol on all plastic products, a number surrounded by 3 arrows forming a triangle. That symbol we are all so familiar with, but this was a completely misleading move. The symbol, designed in the 1970s by an environmental designer and released for public use without copyright, was applied to plastics by the industry with a slight design change. The goal was to create the perception in the public's mind: if this mark is on it, this plastic is recyclable. People quickly began to trust the symbol. They assumed that the number in the middle indicated how many times the plastic could be reused or how easily it could be recycled. But the reality is very different.
In fact, this number only shows which material the plastic is made from. It is called the Resin Identification Code. Here are those numbers and what they actually mean. PET, polyethylene terephthalate. Usually used for PET bottles, it's not recommended to reuse them repeatedly because they release plastic easily. HDPE, high-density polyethylene. Used in products like detergent bottles, shampoo containers, milk jugs, and butter tubs. It is more durable. PVC, polyvinyl chloride. Found in items like fast food containers, plastic pipes, and some toys. LDPE, low-density polyethylene. Used to make shopping bags, food wraps, and some plastic packaging. PP, polypropylene. Includes yogurt containers, diapers, baby bottles, hard plastic cups, and lids. PS, polystyrene. Includes styrofoam, artificial foam, insulation materials, and protective packaging for fragile items. This group also includes plastics like BPA and polycarbonate, which are often considered health risks. But it needs to be emphasized again, none of these numbers directly indicate whether the product is actually recyclable. By using the symbol, the plastic industry had one goal. When you see that mark, you will think you are recycling. You will believe you are being environmentally responsible, and you will use the product with a clear conscience and throw it away. We are not making this up. Larry Thomas, president of the Society of the Plastics Industry, openly said this about the issue. Quote, "If people believe recycling works, they won't feel guilty about the environment." So it's not about protecting nature, but about easing your conscience. Do you notice this deception? These huge companies repeat the same lie in every sentence they say about the environmental and climate crisis. You are responsible. You are to blame. You need to fix it. But this is not the truth. Recycling bins, those blue and green symbols, the entire system is largely an illusion, because only 8.9% of the plastic produced worldwide is actually recycled. What happens to the rest? It is either burned, buried in landfills, or dumped into the oceans. And worst of all, most of this plastic is not technically recyclable in the first place. Only plastics labeled with the codes 1 and 2, PET and HDPE types, are recyclable. But even these can be recycled at most 1 or 2 times, because plastic is not like glass or metal. You can melt and reuse glass and metals, aluminum, steel, etc., repeatedly, almost infinitely. But plastic loses its structure, strength, and integrity after a few cycles. So in most cases, recycling is just a marketing story. Moreover, there are many conditions for recycling to even work. Plastics must be clean, sorted, properly collected, and processed. But companies don't want to spend money on this, so they only pretend to recycle.
Even in the plastic industry's own documents, it says, there is no meaningful use for collected plastics. Producing from virgin materials will always be cheaper and more profitable than recycling. Yet the only thing they tell the public is, just throw it in the recycling bin and don't worry about the rest. This deception is not new. In reports published by the oil giant ExxonMobil in 1982 and later by Shell in 1998, it is stated, if we continue consuming oil at this rate, global temperatures will rise by 3 degrees by 2080, with devastating consequences. People can turn their backs on companies. That's why alternative energy strategies must be developed. Their predictions came true. By 2021, the temperature increase had already reached 1.1 degrees Celsius. And according to the IPCC, an increase of 2.5 to 3 degrees by 2080 is almost certain. So these companies knew the consequences from the start. But what did they do? Nothing. Instead of moving away from oil and natural gas, they increased production. They sold our future, our children's health, and the climate, all for their own profit. And they're still doing it. Green packaging, eco-friendly logos, and recycled labels are just window dressing. In fact, in the US, even before any ban existed,
they passed laws that prohibit banning plastics in the future. Yes, you heard that right. Laws that ban plastic bans. There is only one way to beat these massive tricks. Learn the truth, wake up, and organize. Of course, recycling 8.9% of plastics is better than nothing. But remember, if the plastic you throw away has food residue, if it's mixed with other types of plastic, or if it's placed in the wrong bin, it will most likely be burned or dumped into the ocean. So simply throwing it in the recycling bin is not enough. The real solution is to reduce the plastic you consume, choose reusable products, and trust science, not the system. For example, try to use glass, steel, or ceramic instead of plastic. Reuse plastic bags at home as much as possible. Don't buy new ones. Sometimes we are presented with a false choice, like plastic or paper. Don't fall into that trap. Both are polymers. Both can be recycled only to a limited extent. Paper can theoretically be recycled 6 to 7 times, but its quality drops significantly with each cycle. Moreover, the recycling process can produce more solid waste than plastic. Even paper or plastic bags marketed as reusable can cause significant environmental damage during production. That's why you need to change your perspective completely. Get cloth bags that you can use hundreds of times and take them with you when you go shopping. Pay attention to plastic types. Avoid plastics labeled with the number 3, PVC, and number 6, polystyrene. For plastics labeled 7, if they don't say PLA or don't have a biodegradable symbol, they probably contain BPA, which is harmful. Avoid those two.
Instead of buying small amounts of products every time you shop, try to accumulate and buy more at once. This can be an effective way to reduce bag consumption. If you must use plastic, choose plastics labeled 1 and 2. Especially try to reuse those labeled 2 as much as possible. Don't treat them as single use. But the best option is to completely avoid plastic. However, remember this, no matter what you do, you cannot solve this massive environmental crisis alone. Because this system is shaped not by your individual efforts, but by a deliberate distraction strategy created by big corporations. Those who created this crisis are the plastic and oil giants and the governments that protect them. Therefore, those who will bring the solution are also them. What we must do is pressure the right people, put environmentally conscious people in power, see the truth and take action. Stop belittling environmental activists and labeling them as hippies. They are fighters protecting not your future, but your children's future. Support them both financially and morally. Participate in political processes. Don't let flashy corporate ads fool local and national leaders. Get your information not from advertisements, but from scientists and true science communicators. Remember, these massive profit-driven entities can be ruthless enough to sell the planet without a second thought. That's why I wanted to explain everything as clearly as possible. Because yes, plastics can be easy and useful, but being easy and useful doesn't mean being valuable. See you in the next video. Take care.